What is going on here? Why won't it play sound? I'm going to back out of that. I don't know what's going on, guys. Having trouble with the opening.
It's an ion storm,
It is
unusually
an ion
violent.
storm. Hang on, we're going to try this one more time.
Yeah, and then he says, flashlight, help me find my truck and we'll drive out of here.
Oh,
5, 4, 3.
Now there we are. Hey,
All right.
that's the normal progression.
Yes.
I was saying to the guys earlier, I sometimes I use Snapcam, which is like the broadcasting version of Snapchat, and I was hoping to get a filter that would give me a Spock beard, a goatee, but we didn't have it tonight, so something was going wrong with it. I don't know. It wasn't
Ion storms. It's always
maybe
ion storms.
maybe ion storms, but it wasn't loading the filters. So
Well, you can blame just about anything on a good ion storm. So
you
Yeah.
can blame that on a good iron storm. That's very true. Also, too, I have to apologize in advance, folks. Perils of having a 4-year-old who goes to preschool, and she came home with a cold, and I now have one. So, and I was saying to the guys before, they get a cold, they're over it in an afternoon, and then all the adults suffer for like a week. So, what can you do? But at any rate, tonight is a great show.
Yes.
We are wrapping up our series on Most Influential TOS episodes with what was one of my 3 favorite episodes of the original Star Trek when I was a kid. And that, of course, is Mirror, Mirror. And Mirror, Mirror has all kinds of repercussions through multiple series that came after the original series. And I don't know, we got a lot to talk about. But before we get to that, I always want to do this. I want to ask everybody how they're doing. How are you guys doing? Joe, how you been?
I'm doing well, guys. It's been a challenging couple of months, as you know, personally.
Right.
But we're getting through it, and just taking day by day. So, but feeling good and in accomplishing a lot. So,
well, that's good.
About that.
That's good. Yeah, you were moving, and you were moving stuff from quite a distance, I believe.
Yes, I had to make 3 trips to San Diego in a relatively short amount of time. So, that was quite a bit, and I'm working on that stuff now. As I mentioned before the show, I was hoping to recover at least 1 or 2 of my Star Trek memorabilia to share with you tonight, but we'll just have to do that at a future time.
We'll do that. We'll do that later, sometime after we get through the next series. Leo, how about you?
I'm doing okay. I mean, like I like to say, walking and talking. So,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And the walking is just a bonus for us because you're sitting right now talking.
It's true.
Even if you couldn't walk, you would still be able to do the show.
Presumably, yes.
Yeah, considerably. Yeah. So
I have to compliment Leo real quick because as the ion storm was setting foot and kind of messing with our introduction night, he was doing the quick back and forth. Between the 2 universes.
The very beginning of Mirror, Mirror, there was Spock.
There you go. There you go.
Hey,
Hey,
violent
Craig
ion storm.
Craig Rubin says, hello, gents. Hello, Craig. How are you? Good to see you
All
here
right,
on
Craig.
the
Yes, sir.
Yep.
So yes, there was it's fresh in my mind. So I
yes, yeah, exactly. Well, let's have a look at what we would have seen back in 1960s,
Oh yes.
teasing us with what was coming up next. This one's a little grainier than. Oh yeah, that's true. Before we get into that, Craig is happy to report to have a new clavicle that's been installed.
Yes,
Well, I
Craig
didn't want to
had-
bring up his personal stuff,
Right.
without him doing it first. But yes, Craig's been through his own little trials and tribulations.
Yeah, he sure has. He sure has. Lovely skiing accident was responsible for that. So we're all
climbed into
glad.
a tree and broke his clavicle.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness, poor guy.
He had an operation yesterday. It
Yes.
was an outpatient thing, and he's at home now on a bunch of lovely medications.
Right, which is probably why he's watching the show.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
listen,
yeah.
we'll
Either that
tell
or
our audience where we
it's
can get them.
therapy. One or
Exactly,
the other. I don't know.
especially Craig.
Yeah,
Yes.
right. But Craig, I'm glad you're feeling better, buddy. I
Yes,
really am.
Absolutely.
And we'll have to talk. I haven't talked to anybody in a while. So, all right, let us jump in and see what we would have seen to tease us about this week. Here it goes.
Captain's log, stardate unknown. I command an enterprise where assassination of superiors is a common means of advancing in rank.
Hey, now.
You must know what you're doing.
Let me go! Spock! Get these men off me! Spock! You traitors!
All right, Spock. Whatever your game is, I'll play it.
Our minds are merging, Doctor. I am ordered to kill you and to proceed against the Halkans as the new captain of the Enterprise.
Oh my!
Can you imagine being somebody back in '67 and saying, "Oh
Yeah.
my God, I can't wait till next week"?
Right.
Yeah,
I
that,
know,
that's got to
what's
be.
going on?
It's a
Yeah.
really kind of a bananas teaser because there's no explanation of what happened.
Right.
Just that they're in some place, that looks like the Enterprise, but isn't the Enterprise.
Right.
And Spock's got a beard,
And then he doesn't have a
there's-
beard. And then
Yeah.
Captain
It's-
Kirk is in one uniform, then he's in another. And
Yeah, there's a lot of. I'm sure I would have been like. I'm sure had we all been like Star Trek devotees,
yeah,
like in real time,
right.
like been old enough to appreciate it, and had the luxury of a color TV in the late 1960s, something that for my family would take over 10 years before we got a color TV.
Oh yeah, yeah. Do you know what NBC used to call it too? They didn't. I mean, I know like you'd see the ad and it would say in color.
Yeah,
But when they would announce the press release for a new episode, they would call it the color cast. So it was a color cast of the show.
I wonder if that was a trademarked.
I don't know. I don't know. But
technique.
the NBC color cast of Star Trek. That's how they would start with.
I do remember that '60s era, Peacock
Sure.
unfurling, and
Oh yeah, definitely, definitely. And I had a cousin who worked as a lighting director for NBC at the time, and he gave me a vintage, which unfortunately I lost, which I was really mad about. But it had the vintage that logo that had the N with the B on it, and then it curved around and
Yeah,
the C at the bottom. I remember that logo too. Any rate, so in this clip, we do get to see, which is why I laughed. You get to see that shot of Kirk getting smacked in the face,
Yeah,
which has been used in more memes in recent, it's like Mondays, boom, it's been used over and over again. But I think that would have been a very exciting and intriguing
oh yeah.
thing. Yeah. Do you guys have any thoughts offhand? I have a lot of clips tonight, but they're, we can work around them. I have a couple from Mirror. I have the opening. And then, some of the problems that Kirk gets himself into later on.
Yes.
So, but do you have any initial thoughts?
It's interesting, and I don't know if we discussed this. I feel like I discussed this with somebody, whether it was you guys or one of my many other Star Trek fans.
Right.
They end up on the ISS Enterprise, and they're in the sick bay, and they're trying to figure out what's going on. They very quickly come to the conclusion that it's a parallel universe. They don't waste a lot of time like like having to test, like, their vibrational frequencies or something, like, coming with any, they just very quickly reason it out, or Kurt does, that they're in a parallel universe.
Right.
And later, even as the Enterprise computer, like, hey, is it possible to do that? And the computer's like, sure. And
Right.
then they're like, could we reverse it? Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
I paraphrase, of course.
Yeah.
But
well, I always thought, I mean, I actually kind of, because I've heard some people talk about, wow, Kirk really pulled that out of his ass. He came up with that, what was going on, really fast. Although, I don't know, if you showed up all of a sudden in your home and the decorations were all slightly different and your mom and dad were all of a sudden acting evil and nasty and they were talking about shooting the neighbors, you might think you'd stepped into an alternate dimension.
I guess I sometimes feel like, as science fiction fans, we make those intuitive leaps very quickly because we've seen it so many times.
But then so would a Starfleet officer, don't you think?
Probably. No, I mean, I don't have a problem with it, but I'm glad. I actually think it's more of a feature than a bug, because it sets out there, like, all right, they agree. Yeah, that's what happened. That's what,
right.
And they quickly prove it. So now it's about getting back, and navigating the rather bloody politics aboard the ISS Enterprise.
Yeah. The only part in that whole thing that always used to give me a little bit of a was just when he's talking to the computer.
Yeah.
And he says, is it possible that what we think happened? Yes. Is this something that could be produced artificially? And the computer says yes. And then he says, record procedure. And
I think he does say something about security only on his and Mr. Scott's authorization.
Yeah. Right. That's true. But just the idea that the computer could come up with the whole idea off the bat, I think is just, Scotty doesn't have to put any brain power to it at all because the procedure is already created for him. But
at the time and for many years following, these are all excellent points. I think the only thing that might give it a little bit of legitimacy beyond the initial, and I don't want to jump ahead here, especially jumping ahead almost to the end, but since Discovery serves as a prequel, and even though most of that information is long since buried and classified, there must be remnants of that information available, at least in terms of vague recollection on Kirk's part.
Right.
So there was a precedent.
I imagine that he would, report this to Starfleet, and I'm sure they'd have a lot of questions. And I would think they might let higher ups, know, like maybe captains, like, all right, under these circumstances, this happened to the Enterprise. Be careful, because their parallel dimensions are no longer just a theoretical idea.
Sure.
But it's, I mean, the problem with doing prequels and sequels is it's sort of hard to keep all your ducks in a row. That was a big complaint people had about Strange New Worlds, about the Gorn, because the Gorn were canonically supposed to have appeared first in the original Enterprise and on the original Star Trek show, TOS show. Can I make this more clear? Anyway, the point is that the idea that Kirk would have known about there's always it's like the people like want to show how smart they are, but it sort of robs you of drama. I mean, I like the Gorn in Strange New Worlds because I felt like, it's an enemy we've seen. We haven't seen a lot of them.
Right.
And they make a good bad guy for, Pike and his crew.
Yeah. Hey, Craig has a comment, but before I jump to that, I want to say howdy to Wilson Hunter, who joins us tonight. Gave us a thumbs up. Thank you.
Thank you, Wilson.
And here's Craig. Craig hands Scotty the computer disk with the solution for interdimensional beaming on it. Asks Mr. Scott how long it's going to take, and Scotty says it's all set. Well, he doesn't exactly say it's all set. He says, well, I can't do it by myself.
Yeah, that's right.
And then they wrestle McCoy into it. And then he goes and looks at it, and then he comes back and says, it can be done. So, but yeah, you're right. It is pretty well,
suffice it to say, there's a little bit of dramatic shorthand going on here, but again, to serve the story, it's, we got about 50 minutes or less of actual showtime. So I think it works. I mean, and in all fairness, I mean, it did take Kirk several seconds in the time it took him to spit out the word parallel
Yeah.
to actually figure out what's going on. So.
Yeah. Well, let's have a look just quickly at how this all gets started.
All right.
And then we can talk a little bit about the Halkins.
We believe what you say, Captain Kirk, but our position has not altered. The Halcyon Council cannot permit your Federation to mine dilithium crystals on our planet.
We have shown the Council historical proof that our missions are peaceful.
We accept that your Federation is benevolent at present, but the future is always in question. Our dilithium crystals represent awesome power. Wrongful use of that power, even to the extent of the taking of one life, would violate our history of total peace. To prevent that, we would die, Captain, as a race, if necessary.
I admire your ethics and hope to prove ours. Kirk to Enterprise.
Spock here.
Report on magnetic storm, Mr. Spock.
Standard ion type, Captain, but quite violent and unpredictable.
Rough ride?
If we stay.
Stand by to beam up landing party. Plot an extended over to clear disturbance. Kirk out.
Comply, Mr. Sulu.
Aye, sir. When may we resume discussion?
The Council will meditate further, but do not be hopeful of any change. Captain, you do have the might to force the crystals from us, of course.
But we won't. Consider that. Enterprise. Transporter room energized.
Here we go.
Troublesome.
Oop, what happened? Oh, well.
Well, we know what happened.
We know what happened. Something happened there.
Hopefully we could see her in her Mirror Universe uniform.
Well, we should have. We should have.
It's what's sort of interesting about, speaking of the women's uniforms, they all had those sort of bikini-esque,
Right.
duty uniforms.
Right.
And one of the things the network sort of balked at a lot of the female costuming on the show, because I'll be honest, some of that stuff was I'm like, it's still very sexy, and
Right.
especially for late 60s network TV. But because the Mirror Universe was the opposite of the upstanding Federation, of course the women would dress inappropriately for the
And
workplace.
the issue was not a problem with skirts length. The issue was with exposed
Midriffs.
navels.
Yeah.
And so I'm not really sure how they got away with the exposed navels, except
I think
they were the bad guys.
they just like, hey, we these are the bad guys. Look at the way those women dress.
Right. Hey, Angela says, howdy. How are
Hello,
you,
Angela.
Howdy, Angela.
Good
Thank
to
you for
see
watching.
you. Good to see you. And Craig also says, there have been a lot of Mirror Universe episodes, many other Trek shows, Deep Space Nine, Enterprise. Well, that's none for Voyager. Yes, I know. And that's why we're here talking about this tonight, because this had a big impact on future episodes and series.
Yes.
I will say, can I say this real quick?
Navels.
Well, to Angela's point, I just thought it was interesting. I read this a while back that because there was the dreaded bare midriff naval exposure, although we did previously see it in Shore Leave the previous season, but rumor had it, as I recall, that Roddenberry was so perturbed by this that when it came time later to do one of his successive series, I believe it must have been the either the Genesis or Planet Earth or something, the one that had Mariette Hartley.
Okay.
He gave her two navels.
Right. Yeah,
I remember that.
And it's funny because I think a lot of people make the assumption that the short skirts were really the costume designer and Gene Roddenberry and so on and so forth. But if you remember, in the very beginning, the women and the men both wore pants.
It's true.
Mhm.
And been reading a book, which is called These Are the Voyages, which is all taken from letters and correspondence and documents that have been collected and brought together about the producing of Star Trek. And from what the book tells us, it was the actress Grace Whitney. Am I doing it right?
Yeah, Grace
Lee Whitney.
Grace Lee Whitney.
Yeah.
Who said, "Hey, I've got these great legs, and you're covering them up." And so she insisted as a yeoman that they give her a skirt and that they make it short. And then they decided, well, then, because then the shell said, well, I have great legs too. And they got into a competition between who's could scooch their skirt up high enough to get their legs across between the two actresses. So it's not all about dirty old men producers. The idea for those skirts actually came from one of the actresses. So.
Interesting.
Well, and more recently, Rebecca Romaine, lobbied for a little bit more feminine attire, if that's the way to put it.
Right.
Then she's really going to be given, because number one originally in the cage was of that very dowdy kind of look.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So at any rate, well, all right. So let's hope my computer transferred all of this next clip, because that's clearly what happened there. It cut me off there. But this gives us a little bit more of Mirror, and then we'll get into other.
Mr. Scott, meet me there.
Captain, placed yourself in a most grave position. This conduct must be reported.
You're at liberty to do so, Mr. Spock.
Deck 5, sir.
Oh.
Yep. Smarmy checkup.
It's Chris's favorite moment.
Oh, boom! My face.
So you die, Captain. And we all move up in rank. No one will question the assassination of a captain who has disobeyed prime orders of the Empire.
Now we see the other side.
You traitorous pig! I'll hang you up by your Vulcan ears. I'll have you all executed.
I think not. Your authority on this ship is extremely limited, Captain. The four of you will remain here in the brig and in custody until I discover how to return you to wherever it is you belong.
There's a whole galaxy gone crazy. What kind of a uniform is this? Where's your beard? What's going on? Where's my personal guard?
I can answer none of your questions at this time.
All right, Spock. Whatever your game is, I'll play it. You want credits, I'll give them to you. You'll be a rich man. A commander of your own. I can swing that too.
Apparently, some kind of transposition has taken place. I find it extremely interesting.
Spock, what is it that will buy you? Power.
Fascinating.
Power, Spock. I can get that for you.
Yeah. In some ways, I always kind of wanted to see more of Bill Shatner playing the Imperial captain.
Well, rumor had it we might have seen him do that in Enterprise. Actually, they, again, jumping ahead a little bit, but they were trying to bring him in so badly at some point into Enterprise, and that was supposedly one of the
he was very into it, but it was one of those things where the deal just sort of fell apart.
Yeah.
Right.
But I will say that I like what we got.
Yes,
I have no complaints.
Oh, yeah.
It's funny putting in legacy characters, especially legacy actors.
Right.
sometimes it's cool, and sometimes it sort of detracts from like the main story because people want to go because William Shatner's coming back. Like one of the proposed things was that he would play like a predecessor of Kirk, who was the chef on the Enterprise. That was one of the ideas. And another one is that he was exiled like on I guess it would have been more TOS era because he would have been like on a penal colony somewhere. And you know, I don't know. There were a lot of ideas out there, but
Right.
I'm very pleased with what we got.
Yeah.
But you know, to that point, Chris, I also I was thinking about this earlier, so this is a good time to mention it. When the mirror universe was never continued in the movies at all.
Right. Right.
Wouldn't you have rather seen a good mirror universe cinematic scale movie for Star Trek V than what we got?
Oh yeah.
Well, oh yeah, sure.
That would have
been
yeah. And in that movie, you know, Nichelle Nichols proved she still had it to be the mirror Uhura. So.
Right.
Yeah, I would. It's interesting because apparently in TNG, they were afraid to do a mirror universe episode because because the sort of the popularity of the original episode was so great and so beloved by fans. They were like, we don't want to do a bad version, and they didn't quite know what the TNG era would look like in the mirror universe.
Right. I mean, although they did leap right into a retake on an original episode, which was The Naked Time. I mean, yeah.
Well, that
so,
look how that went over.
Yeah. Well, I'm not.
It didn't
Maybe
inspire
that's why
more.
They decided not to do it. I don't know.
Well,
yeah.
It was perhaps one of the. It's on the bottom of the list. Let's put it that way.
Well, I think that with the Naked Now, I think that's kind of made him skittish about getting too much too soon.
And that's what I meant. Yeah.
And because there was also talk of bringing Spock in earlier in the series, and in an episode called Return to Forever, which would have brought the Guardian of Forever back much earlier than they did.
Oh.
But as we know, I mean, they finally said, okay, I think we've got strong enough storytelling now. By the time we got to DS9, we were able to do that, but. Without abandoning too quickly the TNG aspect, this is, I think they made an attempt to address it in the episode Parallels, which to me at the time I thought, well, this is the ultimate parallel universe story, so I guess that'll be it. We'll never see more of the mirror universe. Well, that was obviously very wrong.
Right. Scott Taylor. Hey, Scott, how are you?
Hey, Scott.
Hey, Scott. A thumbs up again. Good to have you back on the program. Yeah. So, I mean, anything else about this original episode? Things that got you jazzed? Things that you thought were really
it's
cool?
interesting, and this is something I think we can, apply to any mirror universe episode going forward. Everybody loves Mirror. I don't think it's on every like top 10 list, if not top 5 list, for the original series. And very few people I know dislike it. But the problem is it's. You have to there has to be a turn. Like the point is that when Spock at the end, when Kirk sort of at least convinces Spock to consider the possibility that if he changes the Empire, it'll be a better world. Like if he reforms things, which he does, and doesn't turn out so well for the Terrans as we later find out.
Right.
I also think that there's a couple of points. Sorry, Leo, if I didn't mean to cut you off, but one more major than the other. The minor point, I maybe I'm just inventing this in my own mind, but one of the differences of the ISS Enterprise, of course, is the front bulb of the globe of the nacelles that has a little spike on it versus the rotating light. Well, we first saw that way back in the beginning, which kind of, and so it suggests progression of warp drive, for example, in our prime universe, not so much in the mirror. So maybe that was, at least I interpret it as a sign that the mirror universe was not quite as advanced technologically as our prime universe.
Right.
And I think the more important point actually is that when we saw the Hawkins in the mirror universe, they were the same.
Yeah.
Just dealing as they had to with these more barbaric counterparts. So I thought that was a nice nod to show us that not everything in the mirror universe is a polar opposite.
And it's very, very possible that, see, they were always under the gun, number one, because the optical effects really were beyond, like, things that we take for granted as being easy to do today were very hard to do because they were being done practically. They weren't being done with computers. They weren't being done with a lot of the techniques, the motion camera systems that could rotate around they were doing that by hand. And so one of the things I've learned is that there ended up being multiple optical houses that were creating these effects for Star Trek. And a lot of times they were really behind schedule. So when they would go to edit, they would think, well, okay, we don't have that shot yet. We're going to use a stock shot. And then it would end up saving Desilu money, number one. So the producers, Justin was excited about that. But they may have done that with this because they may have gone to thinking, well, it's an alternate Enterprise, so let's pick the one that had from the original that had the little thing sticking out, and we'll use that, and that'll look different, and there's a reason for it. But I was always surprised in the remastered versions that they didn't put the markings on the ISS Enterprise and make them different, because they had the opportunity there to snazz that up like they snazzed up so many other things.
Right.
And when you look at it, it's the same markings as the Enterprise from the Prime universe. So
it's this is sort of a larger observation about the mirror universe itself. Like we all accept it's like the Federation is bad, in the mirror universe. But as you said, the Hulkins were exactly the same. Maybe they were like right so in the middle that there was no variance,
right.
So, but I always thought if in a true mirror universe, the Vulcans would have been the more warlike ones who would have stayed on Vulcan, and the Romulans would have been the more logical sort of intellectuals that left to find, a safer homeland.
Because you're taking it literally that everything should flip.
It in a way it should. I mean, because calling it a mirror universe, but it's only the Federation, is a different, much different thing. So in a way, the Vulcans that landed at Bozeman should have been Romulans, and they should have been shooting up the joint.
Right.
But
don't you think, Leo, that by the time they got to crossover in DS9, that they were kind of anticipating people like us, or they were expecting us, like pacifist Klingons, whatever, and we said, well, we're not going to give them that. We're going to shake it up. And I know that's something Chris is going to talk about when we get to the DS9 stuff.
Right. Anyway, do you want to talk about the middle era, Leo, the DS9 stuff?
I will. I've seen them all, although I only rewatched the first one, crossover.
With old Smiley and
Smiley, yeah. And we get to see all the mirror universe versions of all the, including the intendant, Kira Nerys, who gets to really camp it up. She's really over the top vamping it.
Yeah.
And, she's gorgeous. Her initial costume were a little more frumpy. Like she was like, which is funny because she was a dancer and she's got great legs and a terrific, she's very fit, as the Brits like to say. So she got to play this very over the top, hypersexualized character or version of them. And it's her and Dr. Bashir. And the Terrans are now enslaved by an alliance between the Klingons and the Cardassians, with the Bajorans being now, part of it. They're like an allied state.
Right.
And Cisco is sort of a pirate for the intendant,
Right.
And Miles O'Brien is, the smartest guy on the lower level, but he's still a slave effectively, as all are humans. Odo's the cruel taskmaster. Garrick is like the second command in the station, who's always like plotting against, the intendant. And the thing that's interesting is about flipping it, rather than the Empire still being intact, and the station being run by fascist humans.
Right.
It's being run by fascist Klingons and fascist Cardassians with some fascist Bajorans thrown in there for good measure. The idea that I feel like the dynamic of the world, Star Trek, the initial Star Trek, was still somewhat establishment. They were like more it was the most progressive show on TV at the time.
Mhm.
But to pull a quote from a New York Times review of a movie, it's like being the best dressed clown at the circus. It's sort of like, yes, but so the idea that that the Federation would be overthrown, or the Empire, and find out that Spock did all these reforms and it left them weak for outside invasion. So which is, again, we didn't get to see it. This is just Kira sort of laying a little pipe, in a scene with herself.
Yeah.
So, but it almost becomes a little more Star Wars. It's about underdogs and the idea that, well, most people in this universe are not great, at least the people in power.
Right.
But like Miles is still a decent guy, even if he's been beaten down.
Right.
And even Cisco at a certain point is like, yeah, I'm tired of taking orders.
Right.
So that's the thing.
Well, and that's an interesting point that you make, because when we get into In a Mirror Darkly, there are some characters in that are not like the actual captain of the Enterprise,
right?
Who actually is kind of a good guy.
Yeah, Forrest. It's funny
Yeah.
you mentioned that really popped for me having rewatched it.
Right.
Because
which I didn't remember that well, but he is. He sacrificed himself, and I don't want to get too far ahead, but my only complaint, and I mentioned this off camera in the green room before this, was I would have liked to see them bring the Empire back and have it be still in control, and then see it fall apart, rather than have it just all happen off camera. But that's just me. That's why I was never a huge fan of those episodes in DS9, because I felt like I got ripped off a little bit. But
I think that when you mentioned that before the show, Chris, I thought that was an excellent point. I think that would have been very compelling to see, even if they had to go back in time a little bit, through whatever means, because it might have been a little bit much to show the fall of the Empire and the rise of the Alliance in a series of episodes within the DS9 time frame. But I think we could have seen more dramatized than we certainly did up to that point.
I mean, I'm always down for another jaunt to the mirror universe, because it's always a hoot.
Yeah.
So a place I don't mind visiting from the other side of the TV screen.
Yeah.
Not a place I'd like to live. And here's an interesting point that.
But Leo, what will buy you?
Is
power. I can get that for you.
Loose woman with bare midriffs.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah.
Well, is now what was my point? Oh, here's my point.
Got you flustered.
Is that is established in the original episode? Assassination is how people move up in rank.
Right.
Somebody goes to captain, first officer becomes captain. Everybody jumps up a step. But that's the same on Klingon ships. Not exactly the same, but it is. The Klingons can wrap it up in like it's a challenge of honor and of martial glory, but it's still like somebody like, I think I could do a better job than this guy, so I'm going to kill him and take his job.
Right.
Which is, I will say most HR departments would frown upon that.
Right.
So, but the Klingons, nobody ever blinks, unless I think they think the fight is unfair, and they'd be like, astonished with like some lowly.
And I think in the Klingon code, that's sort of a nod to like the wolf pack in a way. It's like
I think
survival of the fittest, and the
But it ultimately ends up is like murder for a bump in pay. So it's interesting. I mean, obviously the mirror universe is a lot like less. There's no excuse of honor. There's no like emotional stake other than ambition.
Right.
But it's sort of interesting. Then I've never heard anybody address that parallel. So
yeah, it's interesting. It's a really good point.
Well, and Chris, your point about seeing in some fashion the Fall of the Empire dramatized really resonates with me tonight, because it certainly, I think, would have been a better use of the use of numerous episodes,
right,
than what we got, because there was a lot of great moments in the DS9 Mirror Universe episodes. We got to see one that resonates with me personally, as you can imagine. Jake encountering his Mirror Universe mother after she had passed away years earlier.
Right, right.
And the fun of seeing Tuvok, for example, who never, of course, was assigned to Voyager, and seeing him there and everything. But the problem was it was just a little bit too much. I mean, by the time we got down to the last couple, it was getting a little comedic.
Well, I'm trying to remember. Do you guys know how? I feel like there were a bunch of them, weren't there?
They did it every year after that.
Yeah, it was from. Yeah,
it was like
I think there were 5 of them.
5 or 6, yeah.
Yeah. Well, we are at 41 minutes after, so I think I'm going to move us along to Enterprise.
Yes.
Now,
chills.
One of the reasons that I loved that so much was because, and I don't have a clip of it, but because, as you remember, the opening for Enterprise was very different from every other Star Trek series. It was kind of a soft opening. It was post 9/11. It had music with words, and I think it was all supposed to make us feel like we were all going to climb out of this thing together and do great things. So the idea that when they did this Mirror Universe pair of episodes, of which there were 2, it was a 2-parter.
It was 2-parter, yeah.
Yeah, they recreated the opening to show you what it would look like, because it was so much a historical narrative,
yes,
of what Earth did to get to where they are, that they wanted you to see it from the Terran, perspective, which I thought was really, really cool.
Yes, it was.
And Joe, I know you had a lot to say about this episode, so I'm going to turn the floor over to you and let you introduce us to In the Mirror Darkly.
Thank you, Chris. Yes, as I told you before, I mean, this is my absolute favorite follow-up to Mirror Mirror out of them all, before and since.
Mm-hmm.
I like the fact that from the beginning, where we see the familiar first contact between humans and Vulcans, and then suddenly goes south and they attack the Vulcans. I mean, okay, we know we're for something really different here,
right?
To the opening we just saw, and seeing our Enterprise characters in the Mirror Universe. And I mean, how many other episodes serve as both a sequel to, in this case, Mirror Mirror, and a prequel, to
right,
the one with the where we got to see the well, the names of the alien escapes you right now.
Tholian Web.
Thank you, Tholian Web.
Right.
I mean, there's so much about this in terms of execution as well as storyline. It has that little bit of a campy feel at times, but not overdone. One thing I really appreciated about this is it really took the use of established original series aesthetics and really ran with it. We got a full Enterprise-like, Defiant Bridge.
Right.
All the costuming. Okay, so the Gorn wasn't so great. That would improve later in Strange New Worlds. But just the fact that we did go back to that era, as Chris, you were mentioning, where the Empire is strong and such an antithesis of what we're used to,
right?
And with our regular characters, and just so many firsts here. I mean, it's got to be the first episode where there's absolutely no hint of the regular characters, the regular opening and music and so forth. It's a totally separate little universe of its own, literally. And it's a shame that Enterprise was canceled, because I know we were going to get more, and I think that would have been a good use of an annual Mirror follow-up in that time frame.
I couldn't agree more. I was very disappointed we didn't get more seasons in Enterprise. I really felt they hit their stride in the writing and the characters, everything. Season 4, perfect. I have no complaints other than the very last episode, but nothing's perfect, right? Including what I just said. Anyway, it is. They did such a good job of recreating, because spoilers for a 20-plus-year-old episode.
Yeah.
Where they my mind is all over the place today. You'll forgive me.
There's a lot going on here.
A lot going on. Quite.
Damn.
One of the things that and we discussed this briefly earlier on, Captain Forrest, who is the captain of the Enterprise, the ISS Enterprise, in this universe. He's not a good guy. Like, I don't think he would be like. I mean, he is the the military commander of a ship that is accustomed to shooting it first and asking questions later.
Right.
But when Archer mutinies with him, and he's sprung, like Hoshi Sato would sort of become the captain's woman, the Marlena Monroe of this era, and I guess that's what probably earlier than that the tradition of the captain's woman had arisen. So clearly, Mirror Universe not super woke at this point. So, but she helps him with T'Pol to get him out and to retake the ship.
Right.
And you get the impression that he actually gives a shit. Like, he isn't like, you betrayed me and slap her and throw her to the ground.
Right.
He cares about her. And later on, when the Enterprise is about to be destroyed by Tholian weaponry, he orders the crew to abandon ship, and some of them survive, some of them don't.
Right.
But he goes down with his ship. He's not a coward.
No.
And it feels like it's just sort of interesting. So every version of the Mirror Universe has a slightly different tone, because it's been for different shows and by different writers. But it is interesting how that moment, I was like, oh, he actually gives a shit about it, or planned it, like maybe like, listen, if anybody ever tries to mutiny, this is what we do,
Right.
So
yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting that not everybody is just a cartoon evil version of themselves. That he had a little more. Forrest had a little more depth to him.
Yeah.
Even in the Mirror Universe. So,
well, to put it another way, guys. Forrest, along with Smiley and Mirror Spock, I think represent in these various storylines the hesitant hero.
Yes. Yeah, I think you're right. I think they all have a similar role to play.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Spock is still, zapping Mr. Kyle with his agonizer. And,
yes.
He's still following all the protocols, but he does realize that he has the wrong captain.
Yeah.
And he needs to get his captain back. So he helps them to leave.
Yeah. It's there was a DC, I don't know if it was just a graphic novel or whether it was like a short series where the JLA, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, they all go to a parallel universe where it's the Injustice League or something like that, and it's like evil versions of them.
Right.
And Lex Luthor is like the one hero who's trying to save Earth, and but in this particular one, and I want to say someone like Alan Moore wrote it, or Neil Gaiman. So it was maybe, I don't know. I like this just popped in my head, so I did no research on this.
Right.
But one of the premises was when like Superman and the rest are trying to fight and straighten things out, they realize the fundamental like compass of this universe shifts to evil. So where it shifts to good in their universe, the idea that the heroes might get, suffer a loss, but ultimately they will be triumphant. It's the other way around in that universe. And I kind of wonder if that is also a rule, whether it was established or whether I doubt it was established, but whether that is a mirror universe rule.
Could be.
The compass will always move to evil, rather than good.
Right.
Leo, and I'm sure we'll have somebody that might correct us, but I'm pretty sure I'm accurate on this. DC Comics pretty much dealt with, multiple Earths.
Yes.
They were numerically named. So Earth 3 was the flip side. Basically, we had Lex Luthor, but we had the characters like Ultraman, Superman, Owlman for all things, for Batman and so forth. So it always makes for an interesting take on ourselves when we see stories like this that just flip things on its head, for sure.
Yeah.
But
Craig was happy there was no 80s power ballad.
Save that for the credits.
There you go.
Hey, do you guys want to look at a little bit of in the Darkly here?
Yeah,
let's clips.
lay it on.
Absolutely.
Let's throw them up and
the science directorate has examined all these theories. They've found no evidence of alternate realities.
The Tholians are a little more open-minded than your people. They detonated a tri-cobalt warhead. Here, inside the gravity well of a dead star. The explosion created an interphasic rift, a doorway into another universe. A doorway. The rift was unstable. It was too dangerous to send one of their own ships through, so they transmitted a distress call into the opening, hoping to lure a ship from the other side. Their plan worked brilliantly.
How did you learn all this?
The Tholians rely on outside laborers, humanoids. Some of them can be bought for the right price.
I hope you didn't pay too much.
My contact transmitted these images before his signal was jammed.
You can barely see anything.
Computer, enhance grid 3 alpha.
An Earth ship.
According to some theories, everything that exists in our universe should also exist there.
Another Terran Empire? Another Starfleet?
So what? How does this help us?
The Tholians quantum dated a piece of the hull. The ship is not only from another universe, it's from another time. About 100 years into the future. Imagine the technology we can find on that ship. New tactical systems, advanced bioweapons, engines that can reach speeds we can only dream of. All of it ours for the taking.
This is ludicrous, Captain. Someone has fabricated this evidence to lure us here. Commander Archer is guilty of assault and mutiny.
That's enough, Commander.
Sir, I believe we should...
I said shut up. We're investigating this. Get that cloaking device working.
Hello? Oh, I can't hear anyone.
No, I think Chris is muted. There
my
we go.
cough button was off, so that you didn't hear me hacking through that whole thing.
Yeah.
So at any rate, I paused it there because there's a couple other moments, but
Yes.
but that the setup I thought was great, and I wanted to comment on the idea that Archer is assuming there's advanced bioweapons on board the device.
Yeah. Well,
that's the
when
thing.
you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So,
right. Yeah.
Well, and he uses the correct word. I mean, it's both in universe and out. It's brilliant. I mean, tying all this together in such a way was just really struck me at the times, bringing the Tholian web and the mirror universes together.
Right.
And I got to say, I mean, I know that visual reboots, as it were, are inevitable. We have more advanced effects and so forth, but this was the last time it was shown to me that you could use the designs from the original series and they worked.
Right.
They put they put some details in here and there, which were always there.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I didn't put in because I was just running out of room, and quite frankly, I was not feeling well today.
Yeah.
But there is a real kick-ass sequence in which they're battling against what would become the rebellion.
Yeah.
Flying the Defiant, and I thought the ship looked great in that combat, and it was fighting more modern designs in special effects. So I don't know. Yeah,
I mean, in shots where the Enterprise and the Defiant are side by side, I mean, there's no distinction. There's nothing that takes me out of it as far as it looks so fake and old, But regardless, we are where we are now, and that's fine too. But I also find it interesting that as far as the main characters go in this two-parter, really the only ones that are just kind of mustache twirling evil are Archer and Hoshi. The others are they basically just victims of circumstance.
Right.
It's interesting that Mayweather is also like he's Archer's lackey, but he's there ready to cuckold him, like as his organ shut down, I assume, after being poisoned by Hoshi. And of course, the whole thing was with Hoshi. She declares herself Empress, because she has the ship. Because everybody's like, turn that ship over, and they're like, yeah, no,
right.
This is my ship.
Craig joins us in this because he says Mirror Universe Archer and Kirk are lesser, more aggressive versions of their prime characters. Archer sees new tech as a mean for power. Mirror Kirk did the same thing with the assassin machine. That's very good. In his quarters, their power was external. Prime versions, their strength was internal, and they had compassion.
This is true,
and it's a very good point, Craig.
Yeah. The Tantalus field, by the way.
The Tantalus field, yes. Yeah.
Of course, how can you not love Hoshi's last line of dialogue in the show? Prepare to receive instructions. I love
it. Right. Well, you know what? Hang on a second, gents. Because we have two more little moments, and then we'll wrap this up.
What's this? Save it, Commander. The schematics you downloaded, where are they? Schematics. Let's go.
Let's make sure we can see as much of that midriff as possible.
Go, girls.
Yep.
I'm surprised you're not exhausted from all the beds you've jumped into recently.
Whoa!
Oh!
Commander Tucker told me I should give you a few pointers in that area.
Oh!
Bring her.
Here you go. Here's the ship. It looks great. Yeah. And here you go.
Open a channel to Fleet Admiral Gardner. Channel open. This is the Starship Defiant. If you don't surrender immediately, we'll begin targeting your cities. Respond.
Where's Archer? Who the hell are you?
You're speaking with Empress Sato. Prepare to receive instructions.
I jumped the gun in my enthusiasm, but I loved it. And
no, it's fine.
Is it too much of a reach? I don't think it's a reach at all to suggest that maybe Sato and Giorgio are related.
I would think so. I know. I had that same thought.
I think most fans did. I would agree.
Yep.
It's interesting that Mirror Universe to Paul to Pow. To why am I'm
if you're talking about this woman, she's
hey, I'm the one that's sick here tonight.
To Pow or to Paul yes, to Paul is she's fighting for the freedom of her people and the liberty, but she's not above a little slut shaming.
No.
And Mirror Universe host, she is not too elevated in her thought to not like denigrate another woman's sexual prowess or skill.
Right.
So I enjoyed these episodes. It's funny because you talked about the Gorn. When I first saw that Gorn, I was fucking blown away. I was like, that's so cool.
Yeah,
and
I was too. Yeah.
It does not, it has not aged well. It's not the worst CG animation.
It was early work for sure.
It's early work. But I thought it was so cool at the time because it was much more agile. It wasn't a guy in a suit.
Right.
You know,
yeah.
You know, with an unchanging, paper mache face.
Who I believe was also played, I could be wrong, but I think the original Gorn was also played by the same guy who played Rock.
That was
I might be
Cassidy,
wrong.
Something John
Ted Cassidy?
Ted, I believe. But he also played Lurch on The Addams Family.
Right.
So
that would be Ted Cassidy.
Ted Cassidy, yes.
Yeah.
I knew it was like a regular guy name. It wasn't like like Eustace. So
Eustace Lafitte.
Yes.
Well, guys, I'm going to take initiative here and say we're kind of at a little bit of a limit here because we got so much, and we've just barely mentioned Discovery. Now we're at the hour mark. I mean, is this the basis for a future second part where we talk about Mirror Universe in modern Trek, or what do you think? Or should we press on a bit?
I don't know because I feel like because there were that whole run of Mirror Universe episodes, and then they sort of followed it up once they went to the future as well.
Right.
In the last season, the second to last season.
Right.
So maybe we should hold off on. Rather than
it almost seems like a whole show.
Yeah.
And we might,
and also because I don't think it's done yet. I mean, there's a strong possibility that if there is ever a Section 31 series, that it'll probably involve, obviously,
these
characters.
And you've got you've got the return of the what of tomorrow. The Guardian
of Forever, yes.
Guardian of Forever. You've got the return of that. You've got all kinds of stuff in there. And maybe when we go and we get the next season of Discovery, maybe that'll be our lead-in. We'll talk a little bit about that because we'll want to recap some things from the show. And we can do a little dive into that. That might be kind of good because we always have an episode ahead of time where we talk about stuff. So
well, I mean, it serves the point too that this is a highly influential episode, clearly, because it's still happening.
It's still doing.
Yeah.
There's still a universe apart that's still growing and developing, and we can certainly look forward to that.
I mean, one could argue, and it's part of the reason we saved it for the end, that this may have been when you just stack up all of the different series that have had some impact from it may be the most impact story-wise of any of the original episodes. I don't know. I might be stroking.
I don't think you are, because we also want to look at the potential impact and influence of other series and movies and so forth. Now, Star Trek wasn't the first to have a parallel universe type of deal. I mean, you saw some things in Twilight Zone even earlier, but it certainly was impactful. I mean, look what we've had since. I mean, other shows, Quantum Leap, for example, which based its whole concept on that, etc. So there's definitely a lot going on.
Yeah, Sliders.
Going way back to Mirror that we can.
Yeah, Sliders was good.
Sliders, exactly.
Yeah. I'm always a big fan of a parallel universe episode of a show.
Yeah,
and invariably at the end, I'm like, I kind of wish they would stay there a little longer.
Right.
They did that in the first season of Heroes. I was like, this is the most interesting the show has been since the beginning.
Right. Well, and I love a good alternate reality story.
Yeah.
You know, Man in the High Castle, or the new one, For All Mankind. You know,
Right.
I mean, they're all great. I love stories like that because they make you think.
And guys, don't forget the most significant and fascinating newer works that you can find on joetownsville.com in the Joe Townsville multiverse.
Oh, that was a shameless plug.
That was so shameless, but
well, you just slid right there. You slid that right in. That was
and it was
hats
beautiful.
off.
That gives new meaning to the word segue, doesn't it?
Yeah, it sure does. That was beautiful, Joe. All right, guys. Do we have anything else before we wrap this up?
I would just like to say that our thoughts and prayers, for whatever that's worth, are with the people of Turkey and Syria who just suffered that enormous earthquake. They're still, you know, we all would love to live in the socialist paradise that is the Federation, but sadly we're stuck right here in early 20th century, awaiting the Third World War and the eugenics wars.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of suffering. War in Ukraine is still going on. There's been, you know, terrible weather over a lot of the United States.
Yeah.
So it's tough times for everybody. So let's try to keep everybody in thoughts and help where you can. I
think that's an excellent sentiment, Leo. Yeah. So yeah, it's rough. There's been a lot going on. And I was just sadly thinking about the Turkish Star Trek, which is why I'm shamefully.
I was wondering what the
I'm beating myself for laughing about that when terrible things have happened.
Well, it's not like that hasn't crossed my mind, but it's you know, it has not been covered as heavily in the press as I might have expected.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
So,
all right, guys. Now, next week we start our series, I believe. Right. Next week is Picard. Right. Next week is Picard. Joe will take a hiatus from our program to do a show on another network, and then we'll come back hopefully after we do the Picard series. But we will be here. We're going to have weekly guests.
Yes.
And they will try to fill Joe's shoes.
Well,
they will.
You're so good.
They will, because these are people that you all have known before that have been on the show. So, anywho. Have a great week, guys.
You too.
Live long and prosper.
Live long and prosper, or
what's that? Or right, exactly. This one we were doing that for the Klingons, but this one it's really appropriate.
Well, you know what's funny in Enterprise? One last note is sometimes they go with the handout,
right?
The Roman, you know, let's call it the Roman salute,
right?
But sometimes Archer go like this, and they go like put the fist out, like we wanted to get fist bumped.
Right. Yeah.
Don't let me hanging, bro.
Yeah. Don't let me hanging. Yeah. All right, guys. I'm going to roll our end credits. Penny will not be with us tonight to dance because I know she fell asleep. She never had a nap today, and she fell asleep early. But have a great week.
Well, I didn't get my nap either. Look at I'm here.
Hey, right. Exactly. Neither did I. Hey, these 4-year-olds. They have it too easy on them.
Too easy.
Angela says bye.
Thank you, Angela.
Bye, Angela.
We'll see you later. Hopefully, we'll see you next week for Star Trek Picard.
Yeah.
At any rate, have a great week, guys.